Thank you. I'm talking about science and spiritual practices. And we've grown up with the idea there's some kind of conflict between science and spirituality. But what's happened in recent decades, the last 20 or 30 years, is that science has investigated a range of spiritual practices, not with a view to debunking them, but with a view to finding out what's going on. All these practices have measurable effects. And the results of this research, broadly summarized, are that people who have regular religious and spiritual practices are happier, healthier, and live longer than those that don't. That means the converse must also be true. People that don't have spiritual or religious practices are likely to be unhappier, unhealthier, and live shorter than those that do, which is why I think militant atheism should come with a health warning. These studies I summarize in my two recent books, 7 in each book. This book, Science and Spiritual Practices, deals with the first 7, and the second book, which is really a sequel to the first one, ways to go beyond and why they I don't have time this evening to discuss all of these practices, so I'll only be able to talk about a few of them, but I hope it'll give you the flavor of what I'm saying. I try in these books to deal with some practices that are very simple, that are not esoteric, because I think they're things that anyone can take part in. And a good example of this is gratitude. Positive psychologists are that branch of psychology which investigates what makes people happy. A lot of psychology is about what makes people miserable. But fortunately, there's now a branch of psychology that looks at happiness and well-being. One of the things that positive psychologists have discovered is that happy people tend to be grateful people. Ungrateful people are people who take things for granted or feel entitled, and they often complain a lot. Not surprisingly, happy people who are grateful are also more popular than unhappy people who complain a lot and take things for granted. When they came up with this conclusion based on surveys and interviews, some of the critics said, well, of course, happy people are grateful. They're grateful because they're happy. So what they wanted to find out is whether they're grateful because they're happy or happy because they're grateful. They did an experiment, since they're experimental scientists. One of their experiments involved dividing a group into 3 at random. The first group was asked to write a list of things that had happened in the previous week that made them feel miserable, that there were hassles and annoyances. The second group were asked to write a story about something that had happened in the previous week. The third group were asked to write a list of good things that had happened for which they felt grateful. The third group, that had spent 10 minutes writing things they were grateful for, were measurably happier for days afterwards than the other groups. Being grateful actually makes people happy. The thing that worked best, their experiment that was most successful, was what they called the gratitude letter. They asked people to think of someone who'd helped them in their lives who they'd never properly acknowledged, maybe a teacher, a friend, a family member, a godparent, somebody who'd helped them, and they asked them to write a letter to that person, acknowledging their help and thanking them for it, and then to go to that person and read them the letter. People who did that were measurably happier for up to 2 months afterwards. So I think there's no doubt that gratitude makes people happier. It also makes them more popular. And the practice of gratitude is terribly simple. Everyone can do it. Young children can do it. Very old people can do it. Ill people can do it. Well people can do it. Anyone can do it. And there are several very simple things that anyone can do. In my books, I suggest two simple exercises anyone can do for free. One of them is to make a habit of listing things for which you're grateful. I find it helps to do that in the evenings before I go to bed. You can write it down or you can just think it. And this is a daily reminder of the gratitude which helps to sustain us. It helps us to keep in the flow. We receive a great many things. By giving thanks, we're continuing the flow by giving something back, not very much, but it continues the flow. And it makes us feel more connected. And spiritual practices are all about feeling more connected. And you can go as far as you like. I mean, you can be grateful for the nice things that have happened during that particular day. You can be grateful for being alive. You can be grateful for having parents and people who've looked after you. None of us would be here if people hadn't looked after us as babies, and people who provide our food and deliver it to us and cook it for us, and who look after us, dentists, doctors, and so on. You can be grateful for the earth and all that it gives, the solar system on which the earth depends, the entire universe. You can go as far as you like in this exercise. There's no limit. Another simple practice is to give thanks before meals. In the past, most families would have said grace before they ate together. But in a secular society, this habit has sort of died out. People think of it as old-fashioned or too religious or something. But actually, I think it's a very meaningful practice. And in our own family, we hold hands with each other before we eat. And we do this with guests, although under COVID rules, we can't actually touch their hands. But we have a short period when either someone says a grace, or we sing a grace together, or we just have a period of silence when you can give thanks in our own ways. The silence method is simplest because you don't have to ask people whether they object to Christian prayers or Jewish prayers, or if they're atheists, whether they object to prayers at all. You can just have an inclusive silence. Everyone can give thanks in their own way. It makes a big difference to have that period, makes the meal more satisfying, makes the company feel more linked together. So gratitude's a very, very simple thing that anyone can do. And of course, there's nothing new in this practice. All religions encourage gratitude. And my mother and my grandmother used to tell me to count my blessings, and how right they were. I completely agree with their advice now. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I do now. Now, a more familiar spiritual practice is meditation. And I'm quite sure that many people in this group meditate. Meditation was first introduced into Europe by Theosophists. They were 100 years ahead of their time. It's now very, very widespread. It's popularized as a secular practice that's good for health and well-being, that reduces the strain of modern life. And research on its effects has shown that meditation can make people feel more relaxed physiologically. It lowers blood pressure. People who meditate regularly sleep better. They're less prone to depression. There are changes in their brains. Long-term meditators, like Tibetan monks, actually have measurable anatomical changes in their brains. And it's now been so widely taught and propagated that it's incredibly common. About 18 million Americans now meditate regularly, for example. Now, when it's promoted in a secular context as something that's good for health, mental and physical health, it's often treated as if it's just something that's going on inside your brain, changing neurotransmitter levels, changing the physiological activity of the brain, including reducing the activity of the default mode network, those connected brain regions concerned with anxiety and rumination. The activity of those regions of the brain decrease during meditation. For all these reasons, it's propagated as something that's just primarily to do with health and well-being. Some American programs even promote it as something you should do so you can achieve better results in love and business. Now, these are not the reasons that it was promoted by the people who first developed it. Hindu rishis, Buddhist monks, the Buddha himself, Sufi mystics, and Christian contemplatives. From about the 4th century of the Christian era, monks and nuns were living in hermitages or monastic communities, spending hours a day in what they called contemplative prayer, which is the Christian word for what we now call meditation. None of these people were doing it simply to achieve success in love and business. That wasn't their primary aim at all. If you're a rishi sitting in a cave in the Himalayas, love and business are not your principal focus. In fact, they're the last thing that would be your concerns. And a lot of people in the modern world meditate in this secular spirit. In fact, many atheists now meditate. The well-known so-called new atheist Sam Harris has taken up meditation and even gives online meditation courses. But if we look at the reasons people were doing it originally, they were doing it because meditation can lead to a sense of connection with a greater consciousness. There are periods, they may be rare in meditation, they're relatively rare for me, when I feel that my normal thoughts have stopped and I'm connected with a much greater consciousness. These experiences happen in mystical experiences, which can happen spontaneously or as a result of other spiritual practices. But when we have these experiences, which are surprisingly common in the modern world, then the idea that a form of consciousness beyond our own is not some kind of theory you've read about in an esoteric book. It's a direct personal experience. Now, if you're an atheist and a materialist, you'd have to say, well, that's not really a genuine experience. There isn't any consciousness out there. Materialists believe that there is no consciousness in the universe. Matter's just unconscious, and consciousness mysteriously emerges inside our brains and animal brains, but there's no consciousness out there. All religions and spiritual traditions think there are forms of consciousness out there, and the point of spiritual practices is to link with them. So if you have these experiences and you have a spiritual or religious worldview, then it's easy to say, well, this experience of being in contact with a greater form of consciousness than my own is in fact what's happening. And that's, of course, what meditators in the past always thought. You can say, well, it's just an illusion produced by changes inside my brain. But if you do that, you're privileging a theory about the brain and about the universe over your own experience. And after all, consciousness is about experience. So it's not terribly scientific to privilege a rather untested theory, which is manifestly inadequate when it comes to explaining consciousness, over the experience itself. Nevertheless, some people do that, but I suspect that if they meditate and persist with their spiritual practices, their own experience will become more and more persuasive, and they'll begin to doubt the dogmatic materialism with which they've been brought up. Prayer is a different practice from meditation, petitionary prayer, which I discuss in my book, Ways to Go Beyond. It's about asking for things. It's often considered by spiritual people as being rather a low-level practice. But if you look at the world as a whole, it's probably one of the most common spiritual practices. All people within a religious context pray. Many do it individually. All religions have collective prayers. Prayer is, of the petitionary kind, is usually very practical. It's about asking for healing, for help, for protection from danger, and for other practical things, passing exams, doing well in business, and so forth. When I lived in India, which I did for 7 years, I once went to visit one of the most esteemed sages in India, the Shankaracharya of Kanchipuram. And I was with an Indian friend who translated for me what people were saying to him. And he was being thronged by people who wanted his darshan, his look, and also wanted to ask for his blessings. I assumed that they'd all be asking for things about blessings in their meditation, etc. But actually, practically all of them were about things, very practical things. Success in business, they were starting a new shop, they wanted his blessings on it. They wanted to find a good husband for their daughter when they couldn't afford a very big dowry, and so they needed special sort of providential help in that. Passing exams, their mother recovering from sickness, things like that, very practical. And whereas in meditation, we withdraw from the concerns of the world and the worries and the thoughts that are going through our minds, in prayer, we connect with them. And there's a sense in which petitionary prayer and meditation are opposite. In meditation, we withdraw from the concerns of the world and the worries in our minds to connect with that underlying consciousness, which underlies our own consciousness and all forms of consciousness in the universe. In prayer, we start with an invocation to a spiritual being greater than ourselves. Our Father, who art in heaven, Hail Mary, full of grace. Om Namah Shivaya. O Allah. We start with an invocation to God or to a saint or to an angel, or to an ancestor in many traditional tribal religions. And we then ask that spiritual being to connect with our concerns and help in ways that we ask for. So there's a sense in which that's moving from the spiritual center outwards towards concerns in the world, whereas meditation's moving from concerns in the world inwards towards the spiritual center. And in that sense, I think that petitionary prayer and meditation are complementary. I think of petitionary prayer as like breathing out and meditation as like breathing in. And of course, we need to breathe in and to breathe out. I myself do both. I meditate in the mornings and I pray in the evenings, just before I go to bed. And I pray about anything that's worrying me or concerning me. And I find it enormously helpful to do that. I feel that many of my prayers are answered. It'd be hard to prove it. But at the very least, it makes me feel better and makes me sleep more soundly because I don't go to bed worrying. And a lot of people who don't pray do go to bed worrying, keeps them awake. And insomnia is one of the great medical problems of our time. I think partly because so many people don't pray. So prayer and meditation are spiritual practices which are very familiar. One that's less familiar is sports. Most people don't think of sports as a spiritual practice. And yet, I think in the modern world, sports is probably the commonest way in which most people enter altered states of consciousness. Meditation and many other spiritual practices are about being present. You can only be connected with the spirit in the present. You have to become present. And most of us aren't very present most of the time. We're having regrets about the past, worries about the future, thinking about our plans, what we should do tomorrow, what we haven't done, what we ought to say to somebody, what we wish we'd said to somebody, sometimes mulling over resentments or things that make us angry, and so on. They're all things that take us out of the present. The point of meditation is to come into the present. But sports do that even more effectively for many people. I first realized this when I was talking to an American friend who is a business person and who told me when he'd been extremely busy in his business, he couldn't sleep, he worried a lot, his mind was racing all the time. Tried meditation, it just didn't work. He couldn't stop his racing mind. But he's a mountaineer as well, and he said that by the time he was 50 feet up a rock face, he was totally in the present. You know, the only thing that matters is where the next finger hold was or toe hold. And I think this is true for many people. If you're skiing downhill at 60 miles an hour, if you don't concentrate, you could go over a cliff and you'd be dead. If you're in the middle of a football game with people cheering from the sidelines and someone's passing you the ball, you have to be completely present. You can't be thinking about something your girlfriend said yesterday that pissed you off, or whether you paid the gas bill. You have to be completely present. And all sports have that quality. Sports differ from games. Sports involve skillful physical activity. Some sports are games like football and cricket, um, but not all sports are games. Skiing, mountaineering, um, angling, fly fishing, um, motor car, driving fast motor cars or motorbikes, kind of sport activity. These are not games, and dangerous sports, base jumping and hang gliding and so on. They're not games, but they do involve physical skill, which means you have to concentrate intensely in the present. Not all games are sports. Chess is a game, but it's not a sport. It can, of course, involve intense concentration and bring you into the present, but sports have this particular quality. And many people who practice sports do indeed have spiritual experiences. Michael Murphy, who founded the Esalen Institute in California, which is one of the great centers of the human potential movement, was very keen on sports, as he thought of them as the yoga of the West, a kind of bodily spiritual practice. He wrote a book called Golf in the Kingdom about the spiritual side of golf, which is, for years, has been a bestseller among golf players. So Michael Murphy made it very clear that there is a kind of spiritual dimension to sports, both team sports, where there's a greater sense of connection with others through working together to achieve a common goal, in the case of football, actually scoring a literal goal. And also individual sports like downhill skiing or mountaineering or long distance running or jogging. And last year, I got to meet the champion world free solo high wire person, a young German who walks on not wires, rather, but high line. It's a kind of tape thing that, like a tightrope. He walks with drops of 1,000 feet beneath him between skyscrapers or over great waterfalls in British Columbia, with no safety harness. And I asked him what makes him do it. And he said that his concentration is so intense, he forgets everything else. The slightest slip and he's dead. And he knows that. He's on a knife edge. He's on the very threshold of death. And that gives him such an intense sense of presence that he says for him, it's a kind of spiritual experience, the most powerful spiritual experience he knows. That's why he keeps doing it, because it's almost addictive, he said, the sheer power of this spiritual experience. So I think that sports are an unacknowledged way in which in our secular modern world, many people achieve spiritual states, even though they may not even recognize them as that. But I think that's the reason so many people do these sports. Skiing, after all, is pretty pointless if you think about it. You can break a leg, it costs a lot of money, you've got to go abroad, or if you're lucky, to Scotland. You can't go anywhere now to do it, I suppose. But it's something which people do for the sheer thrill of that experience. They don't gain anything by it, unless they're a professional skier who wins races or prizes. They're doing it because of the experience itself. And that's why people are doing these sports activities. Another unexpected way in which people achieve a spiritually enhancing sense of presence is through animals. Animals don't have worries in the way that we do. They've got plenty of things they might need to worry about or fear, but they don't have language and they don't have the discursive ruminations and worries and anxieties that so plague so many people. They live much more in the present. I think that's one reason that so many people keep pets. If you have a cat lying on your lap purring, the cat is perfectly happy to be exactly where it is. It's not trying to go anywhere else, do anything else. It's utterly happy being where it is, and that's why it's purring. And if you get into this, if you sort of listen to the purr, recognize that the cat's totally in the present, happy to be just exactly there, being here now, it helps you to be here now. And I think that's one reason people like having cats. I think dogs, in a similar way, show their absorption in the present. Say you've got a dog that's wagging its tail, it's holding a stick, it's crouching down in its play attitude, it wants you to throw the stick for it. It's totally present, and it can make you totally present. You may find it irritating at first, but it can be so persistent that you throw the stick, and it then is so joyful in the enjoyment of this pursuit, this playing, that it can bring you into its present, into the present with it. Riding a horse brings you completely into the present with the horse that's completely present in its movements. And so I think we can actually learn from animals. Normally, the usual spiritual attitude to animals in all religions, they all have a kind of very humanist, centering, a speciesist point of view. We're the highest forms of consciousness in the physical world, and animals are lower. And if you're reincarnated, as some Hindus and Buddhists think, if you're not a good person, you'll end up as an animal, and that's a definite demotion. If you're a good animal, you might get promoted to being a person. So there's this sort of hierarchical view, and we've got it, of course, in our own society. That's why we eat animals, but we don't eat people. People are considered of supreme value, and animals a lot less. You can buy and sell them like slaves. In fact, treating people like animals makes them into slaves. I mean, you buy domestic animals, oxen, draft animals, etc., are sort of animal slaves. So we're so used to that, or you can grow millions and millions of chickens in factory farms, so we can just eat cheap meat in supermarkets, buy cheap meat in supermarkets. But actually, most people know there's more to it than that, which is precisely why they keep pets. Pet keeping has grown with modern secular societies and with prosperous societies. People in peasant societies keep animals because they need them as draft animals, or as guard dogs, or of cats to keep down the cats keeping down the mice, and so on. They don't keep them just because they like having them there. They probably do like having them there, but that's not the sole reason. Whereas in the modern world, for many people, it is the sole reason they keep them, despite all the intense expense, the veterinary bills, the nuisance, picking up the poo when you take a dog for a walk, all these things are real nuisances. But people put up with all that because the animals are giving them something they wouldn't otherwise have. And I think that is something which can be seen as having a spiritual value by bringing us into the present. And also through our aesthetic appreciation of their beauty, their elegance, the grace with which they move, and so on. And of course, aesthetic appreciation is another aspect of the spiritual. So animals are another way. And then I'd like to say a little bit about pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is something I didn't think about at all until I went to live in India. And when I was living in India, in South India, I lived in Hyderabad for 5 years, where I worked in an agricultural institute, and in Tamil Nadu for 2 years, where I lived in a Christian ashram. Everywhere there are pilgrims in India, going to temples, holy men going to the source of the Ganges or to Benares to bathe in the holy river, people going to in local pilgrimages to sacred trees, and even little pilgrimages to termite mounds where cobras live. There's a special festival in India, Nag Puja, Snake Puja Day, when you honor cobras, and people go to the cobra, a little micro pilgrimage to make offerings to the cobra, because cobras, like many other animals in India, are sacred. And it's believed that if you're nice to them, they'll be less likely to be nasty to you by biting you. So there are all these pilgrimages of all different kinds in India. And I was fascinated by this. When I worked in Hyderabad, I was in charge of a whole unit there. I had about 100 people working for me. I had to sign their leave forms. And many of the Hindus who worked with me would go on pilgrimages. I'd have to sign the leave form and they'd tell me where they were going, usually to the temple of Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh, which was the major pilgrimage place near Hyderabad. And when they went there, they did a puja, they made offerings, they had prasad, sacred food blessed, and then they came back and shared the sacred food with me and with other people at work and with their families. And I felt this was a lovely thing to do. They were including me in the blessings they received through their pilgrimage, along with many other people. When I got back to England after living in India, I realized that actually there are all these sacred places here in England too. In fact, all over Europe. In fact, everywhere in the world, there are sacred places. And pilgrimage is a journey to a sacred place. It happens in all religions. In Hinduism, there are many. In Islam, there's of course Mecca as a major pilgrimage, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, to go on a Hajj to Mecca, but also many other local ones. When I lived in Hyderabad, there were many Sufi shrines called dargahs where local Muslims would go on pilgrimages. Jewish people go on pilgrimages to Jerusalem, Sikhs to the Golden Temple in Amritsar, Christians to many places. The most famous in Europe at the moment is Santiago de Compostela. In the Middle Ages, the whole of Europe was crisscrossed with pilgrimage routes. At the Protestant Reformation, pilgrimage was suppressed in Protestant countries. In England, in 1538, it was made illegal. Thomas Cromwell, working for Henry VIII, passed an injunction against pilgrimage. The shrines were destroyed, the monasteries were dissolved, and the monasteries provided the infrastructure for pilgrimage, there where pilgrims could sleep and get food on their journeys. And the land of the monasteries was privatized. The riches of the shrines were confiscated by the king. And pilgrimage simply was abolished. So it was in Germany, in North Germany, in the Lutheran parts of Germany, and in Scandinavia. In fact, in all Protestant countries, pilgrimage was banned. Well, I think that it's a deep human need to go to these holy places, to connect with these holy places. I think it goes back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. I discuss this in my book, Science and Spiritual Practices. And what happened here in Britain was that within a few generations of pilgrimage being banned, the English had invented a secularized substitute, which they called tourism. And I think tourism is best seen as secularized pilgrimage. It's nothing like as satisfying, because when a tourist goes to a holy place, and tourist attractions usually are holy places, cathedrals, temples, shrines, great mosques, and so on. When they go to a holy place, they can't kneel down and say a prayer or light a candle or do a puja, because they think of themselves as modern secular people who've risen above all that. That's just for stupid religious people who've been bamboozled by priests and who are superstitious and haven't seen through all this. They have a contemptuous attitude to religion and think of themselves as being modern people. And they have to pretend they're primarily interested in art history. Most of them aren't very interested in art history, but they have to pretend they are. And they have guides who tell them the dates of everything and how many tons of stone are in each building and that sort of thing. But in fact, I think tourism is a form of frustrated pilgrimage. And the easiest way for a paradigm shift to occur in this area would be for tourists to stop going as tourists and to start going as pilgrims to holy places, which means going with an intention and making an offering to the place. Hindus give offerings of flowers or coconuts or just a cash offering is the absolute default minimum, because these places have to be maintained. And making an offering. And then something I learned in India, which I do here in England, is before you go in to a temple, you don't just walk straight in. You walk round it first, you circumambulate it. Hindus do it clockwise. And that makes the holy place the center. And when you go in, you've already made it your center. There are cultural differences about how you do this. So Hindus walk anti-clockwise around Mecca. Bon in Tibet walk anti-clockwise around Mount Kailash, whereas Hindus and Tibetan Buddhists walk clockwise around it. So these are minor differences compared with the principle. Now, interestingly, pilgrimage is undergoing an enormous resurgence in Europe. Having been banned by the Reformation, and then in France by the French Revolution, which was deeply anti-Christian. Many priests and monks were executed, monasteries were desecularized, and so were many churches and cathedrals. Pilgrimage was banned, as it was in Soviet Russia under the communists, who were atheists and who suppressed pilgrimage in Russia. It dwindled with the secularization of Europe, even in Catholic countries where it wasn't banned. But starting in the 1980s, there was a remarkable resurgence began. The route to Santiago de Compostela, the Camino, was re-established by a group of enthusiasts who made sure that there was an infrastructure, places where pilgrims could sleep and where they could get food. And in 1987, soon after this happened, 1,000 people walked there on foot. Last year, 2019, 330,000 people walked to Santiago de Compostela. Many of them were not devout Roman Catholics. Even lots of atheists and agnostics go. Many people who are spiritual but not religious. And I think that pilgrimage is a literal expression of a spiritual quest. The holy place that's the goal of the pilgrimage is a place where pilgrims have gone, in many cases, for centuries, sometimes millennia. And I think these places have a kind of memory in them, given by the process I call morphic resonance, which is a memory principle based on similarity. And when people enter these holy places, they're exposed to the same kind of smells, sights, visual, sensory stimuli as people who've been there before. And I think tune in through morphic resonance to many people, sometimes millions of people who've been there before, a kind of collective memory of that place, which gives their place its power. Collective memories of places can also be bad. Some places where there have been battles or terrible things happening, or death camps like Auschwitz, can have very bad collective memories, which have a negative effect on people. So it's not always good, this memory effect, but in most pilgrimage places, it is something which is, many people find it greatly increases their sense of connection. Again, a common theme of these spiritual experiences. I suggest, if you haven't been on a pilgrimage, that you try it. And you don't have to go to Santiago. Here in Britain, there's a new organization called the British Pilgrimage Trust, which is reopening the ancient footpath pilgrimage routes, including the old way to Canterbury from Southampton or Winchester, about 19 days. You can find out about it on britishpilgrimage.org. And this year, the British Pilgrimage Trust developed new one-day pilgrimage routes to all 42 English cathedrals. They're usually about 5 or 6 miles. You start from a village nearby and walk in on a route, often taking in ancient holy trees, sacred wells, to one of our great cathedrals. One-day pilgrimages are actually very effective, and I've been doing them for the last 5 or 6 years with a teenage godson of mine. Every year, I go with him on a one-day pilgrimage to one of our great cathedrals. Last year, Chichester the year before that, Winchester the year before that, Lincoln the year before that, Ely the year before that, Canterbury. We walk together, we have a most lovely time. We go with an intention, we have a picnic on the way, we get to know each other much better, we have plenty of time to talk and plenty of time to be in silence. We go to the cathedral, light candles at the shrine. Most of them have shrines to saints. We then have a cream tea, and we go to choral evensong, which is this beautiful sung service, sung every day in our great cathedrals. There's no sermon on weekdays. It's 45 minutes of pure beauty with well-trained choirs echoing in these ancient sacred spaces, all for free. And that again is a kind of spiritual experience, whatever your belief system. The choral evensong is the favorite service of noted atheists like Stephen Fry, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett. All of them attend choral evensong because they find it so moving and so beautiful. So it's nothing to do with signing up to a belief system. If you're a Christian, it's probably more meaningful than if you're not, but it's meaningful for anybody because of the sheer beauty. And these services have now resumed in English cathedrals, even despite COVID. You can find out about those on a website called choralevensong.org, which enables you to find choral evensong anywhere in the country, or in Britain, anywhere in Britain or Ireland for that matter, when it is, what music they're singing, and so on, where it is. So I think pilgrimage is something which has a great power. It's deeply archetypal, and it's a spiritual practice that anyone can do, and it works very well for children. I myself find that turning my journeys into pilgrimages is very helpful. When I visit a new town or city, I try to get, or village, I try to make the first stop at the central sacred place. In India, it's usually a temple. In Muslim countries, a mosque. In historically Christian countries, a church or a cathedral. So I go there and ask for the blessings of the place, acknowledge the place, give thanks for it, make an offering. I usually give a cash donation, and ask for the blessings of the spirit of that place on my time in the place, on the people I meet there, on the people back home, on my journey home, and the time I'm spending there. In churches and cathedrals, they usually have candles you can light and do this. I find this makes the visit to the place so much more meaningful and worthwhile and satisfying and helpful by giving it this spiritual dimension and acknowledging the power of that sacred place in the center where people have worshipped and prayed and sung and chanted over decades or centuries or even millennia. And again, this is a very simple thing to do. It usually doesn't cost anything except the price of the candle or the donation you make. And it is a way of helping to sacralize our lives. All of these things have psychological and spiritual benefits. And of course, pilgrimage has a health benefit too, because you're walking, and exercise is good for you, and walking in nature is good for you. You connect with nature, with ancient holy places. It gives more meaning to life. So these are some examples of spiritual practices which enhance our sense of connection, both with each other through collective practices. I haven't talked about chanting and singing, which we can do individually, but are ways, the quickest way to come into resonance with other people is through singing and chanting together. My wife, Jill Peirce, teaches chanting workshops, and I've seen many, many times how a group of people who are strangers at first, some even think they can't sing, through chanting together, come into an extraordinary harmony with each other. And by the end of a couple of days of a weekend workshop chanting, people are sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It's enormously life-enhancing practice. So some of them are about connecting with other people. All of them are about connecting with spiritual dimensions beyond our own consciousness. Even if in the case of atheist meditators, they try to pretend it's really all about their own brain. The actual experience is of being connected to something greater than ourselves. And what's exciting at the moment is that we now have access to spiritual practices from all the world's traditions. And I would say that Theosophists were in the forefront of this movement. In the late 19th century, it was Theosophists who first recognized the value of practices from the religious and spiritual traditions of the world. And in an ecumenical spirit, took up some of these practices, including meditation, helping to popularize it, as I mentioned earlier, long before anyone else was doing that. We now have access to all these great spiritual traditions. We now have scientific studies that have investigated them and have, generally speaking, shown that they're very beneficial. And we're in a position now where you can do these practices. If you're not religious or anti-religious even, you can do these practices. If you are religious, then you can also do them. You're probably doing them anyway, but these scientific studies help in understanding why they work and what's going on when you do these practices, and there are many benefits. And I think as we move into a new phase of humanity living here on Earth, where economic growth can no longer be the principal objective of every government, and we've just got to live more sustainably. We have to live in a more sustainable way with less consumption. But we can have much happier and more satisfying lives if we pay more attention to the spiritual dimension, which has been so neglected in the last few generations with the rise of secularism and turn away from religion by so many people. So whether you're religious or spiritual but not religious, or even non-religious, spiritual practice has something to offer for everybody. And it's not just having one, we can have lots. You can pray and you can meditate and you can go on pilgrimage and you can sing and chant and you can fast and you can take part in sports activities and you can have a dog or a cat and benefit from it. And you can go on to sacred places and you can appreciate their beauty. It's not either or, it's both and. And all of these things can enrich our lives. Well, that's a summary of what I wanted to say, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that might arise.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheldrake, for a very interesting lecture on the importance of spiritual practices. We are opening for questions now. We will have only 4 questions, please. If you would like, all right, 10, please, you may ask a question. If you would like to ask questions, please raise your hand using the raise hand option you will see in the chat. 10.
Dr. Sheldrake, thank you very much indeed for a fascinating and very thought-provoking talk. To what extent do you think that spiritual ideas and attitudes are slowly beginning to permeate mainstream science and influence it? And what do you think the immediate prognosis is? Are you optimistic that this might increase or not?
Well, I think that the first point is that many scientists do actually have spiritual or religious practices. A recent survey carried out in Britain, Germany, and France showed that about 25% of scientists, engineers, and medical professionals are atheists, higher than the normal proportion in the population. Another 20% or so are agnostic. So 45% classify themselves as non-religious. On the other hand, 45% classify themselves as spiritual or religious. So the actual militant atheists, well, among the atheists, only a minority are militant atheists. So atheists are actually only about 25% of the scientific community, even in France, which is the most atheistic part of Europe, I would say, at least of Western Europe. So even today, many scientists and medical practitioners and engineers have a spiritual part of their lives. And when I worked in India, it struck me that if you look at the modern world, the majority of young scientists today are not Europeans. They're Asian, they're Indians and Chinese. And when I worked in India, practically all my Indian scientific colleagues were religious or spiritual. I mean, when they got home from work, they were sort of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, Christian. I met hardly any Dawkins type atheists in India. The only one I met actually was someone who'd studied for several years at Cambridge, where he'd done his PhD. I think it's also the case that many young scientists today have taken psychedelics, which for many is a gateway experience for spirituality. And again, they probably wouldn't want to discuss this with their colleagues at work, but the scientific world is full of closet spirituality. It's a bit like gays in the 1950s. You know, most people who are scientists or engineers don't talk about it at work, but it doesn't mean they don't have these views. And I think what will change things is when they stop being afraid of coming out. Well, one example is the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Within that professional group, they can have special interest groups where people can gather together with colleagues to discuss special interests. And a few years ago, someone started the spirituality special interest group on the grounds that spiritual matters are actually of concern in the realm of mental health. Obviously they are. That now is the largest special interest group in the Royal College of Psychiatrists. It has more than 5,000 members, where psychiatrists can meet together and discuss these things without fear of censure or ridicule. And I think the more that kind of thing happens within scientific organizations, the better. Meanwhile, within science itself, there's a lessening of the power of dogmatic materialism, and partly through the hard problem of consciousness, a surprising growth of interest in panpsychism, the idea of consciousness being distributed more widely throughout the natural world. It's now even respectable in academic, philosophical, and neuroscience circles to espouse a panpsychist point of view. Ecological consciousness is also helping to shift science in a more holistic direction. So I'm actually fairly optimistic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have another question. We have Ted Fish. He's actually asking if concerts, rock concerts, can be considered a form of pilgrimage.
Well, I think pilgrimage depends on intention. You know, people go on a pilgrimage with an intention, usually for healing, for blessings, for some kind of spiritual benefit, sometimes out of penitence or to ask forgiveness. Now, a rock concert, if it's simply purely hedonistic, is unlikely to have that effect. But on the other hand, rock concerts often give people a feeling of tremendous bonding with other people at the rock concert. You're tuning in through music to shared rhythms and have a collective consciousness together, which can be a powerfully bonding experience and which can give a sense of togetherness and linkage. It may not be conceived of in a spiritual way, but being part of something bigger than ourselves is a step towards a spiritual experience. So I think they can actually, and I think that especially festivals like the Glastonbury Festival actually tune into an ancient spiritual archetype. In my book, Ways to Go Beyond and Why They Work, one of the chapters is on holy days and festivals. And holy days and festivals are present in all religious and indeed many secular traditions too. A holy day is a holiday. That's the same word. And it's a day when you're not working, when you can do things together and celebrate together. And we need to celebrate together. We need to have breaks from work. That's the whole point of the Sabbath in the Ten Commandments. Jewish people are better at observing it than most others. I don't just mean Orthodox Jews, I mean just the sense of the Sabbath as a special time is very widespread even among secular Jews. And I think festivals, summer festivals like Glastonbury, have actually tuned into this ancient archetype of coming together to celebrate. I think Glastonbury does have a spiritual dimension. It has an ecological sort of ethos. And funnily enough, it usually happens over June the 24th, which is the traditional European celebration of Midsummer. It's Midsummer's Day, June the 24th. And it's the feast of St. John the Baptist. And funnily enough, Pilton, where the Glastonbury Festival happens, the parish church there is dedicated to St. John the Baptist. And that's exactly the time when the village of Pilton would have celebrated together for the patron saint and for the midsummer for centuries and centuries, long before the Glastonbury Festival came along. So I think, yes, indeed, they can tune in to this archetype.
Thank you. We have many questions, but we will be focusing only on two more questions, one from Hasmukh and the other one from Michael. Hasmukh Shah, he is asking, how much room is there for being neutral, neither happy or unhappy, neither religious nor atheist? And I would like to complement. I think that his question also is related to positive psychology, and we could say also to the notion of William James, of the sick type, and of the positive of happy type of personality, in which from which positive psychology is inspired. So what would you have to say on that, please?
Well, obviously there are personality differences, and some spiritual practices suit some personality types better than others. And luckily there's a huge range of spiritual practices. So it's not a one size fits all at all. Each of us can find what works for us. I think that it's possible to, obviously we all have neutral states of mind where we're neither sort of happy nor unhappy. But of course, our states of minds change all through the day. Very few people would deliberately choose to be unhappy as much as possible. So I think that practices that make us happier would be attractive to many people. There are some people perhaps who revel in misery, but I don't know many, fortunately. And I think it's possible, as I said, to do these practices while you're neither atheist nor religious. I mean, there are many people today who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, and I think that's exactly this category that he seems to be suggesting. It's perfectly possible to be spiritual but not religious. It's perfectly possible to be atheist and have some kind of spiritual side. Philip Pullman, for example, is an atheist, and yet he has a great sense of the life of nature, connection with it, the mystical power of the natural world. So he's rejected a particular image of God, but he finds a kind of spiritual link with nature. And of course, it's very possible to be religious and spiritual. So I think the point is that we're all different, and also people change throughout their lives. I mean, I, for many years, was an atheist. I was converted to atheism through my scientific education when I was at Cambridge, at school first and then at Cambridge. And I was drawn back to a more spiritual approach through traveling in India, through taking psychedelics, opening up my sense of the realm of much greater sense of the realm of consciousness, and through practices like meditation and yoga. I started off really through Hindu type practices. And so I went through personally in my own life through a range of different attitudes, and so do many people. So again, it's not one answer for everybody all the time.
Thank you. Michael, you have the word now, please. Unmute your mic, please, Michael. We cannot hear you.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello,
we
can
can hear
me
you now. Yes, yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry, sir. Rupert, having coached and played sport all my life, I understand to get into the so-called free flow state, you have to quieten the prefrontal cortex. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, because being in the so-called zone, you can't think about it. It has become more contemplative.
Well, I'm sure that being in the zone, which is one of the ways, or in the flow, which is one of the ways that people talk about these states in sports, involves quietening down but certainly the default mode network part of the mind. But we know less about what happens in the brain during sports for a simple technical reason. I mean, meditators are literally sitting targets for researchers. You know, if you're going to wire people up with things on their head and put them in brain scanners, they've got to stay still. Whereas if you're skiing downhill at 60 miles an hour, or if you're in the middle of a football game, it's harder. I mean, there are now mobile devices that you can monitor the physiology. So it's becoming more possible. There's been less studies of the detailed brain changes during sports than there have in meditation or psychedelic experiences where people are still. But I think we'll see more as these miniature devices become more widely available and get even more easy to wear. So I don't know to what extent some people find that by meditating before entering into a sports event, by preparing themselves psychologically, they can do better. And this becomes very important in very competitive sports like Olympic sports, where just the slightest difference will make all the difference between winning and losing. It really matters. But I think for most people who go jogging or skiing or play football with a few friends or village cricket teams, most of them are not trying to change their state of mind, particularly beforehand. But they might benefit from doing so. But I think that these changes will happen anyway through participation in the sport. Of course, in martial arts, there's an explicit acknowledgement of the importance of the spiritual dimension, and books like Zen and the Art of Archery actually played a big part, I think, in Michael Murphy's recognition of the importance of sports as a spiritual practice.
Thank you. Could you please mention once more the name of your book? Because I think everyone is interested in reading more about it.
Well, the first one is Science and Spiritual Practices. And this is translated into a number of other languages, including German. And the second one, which is a sequel, is called Ways to Go Beyond and Why They Work. And so each one deals with 7 different spiritual practices. They're both available in paperback at bookshops, on Amazon, etc. And in the second book, Ways to Go Beyond, in the final chapter, I try to bring together how such very different practices like sports and meditation and chanting, how such very different practices can all relate to the spiritual world. And briefly speaking, it's because the spiritual world is not an undifferentiated reality. It has different aspects, which Hindus call Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And anyway, I try and bring this all together in that book.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheldrake, for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. We are closing today's session. Lyndon, do you have anything to say?
On behalf of all of us here, well, personally first, I must say it's been a really interesting conversation we've had with you, and we can't thank you enough, Dr. Sheldrake, for attending and helping us with your insightful information and wonderful knowledge, and I'm sure a lot of our colleagues will go on to purchase your illuminating books. On behalf of us here, I would like to convey our warmest thanks, and on behalf of everybody at the European School of Theosophy and with all the attendees, we would like to wish you all the very best with your future research, and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Thank you very much, and this would conclude the lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Our session is closed. Thank you very much, Dr. Sheldrake.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.